Tom Dreesen is going to be on the show, and we're going to bring him on right after this.
The following is a Tony Lasano podcast, an Opie production on the Radio Misfits Podcast Network. This is the Minutia Men Celebrity Interview with Rick Kempfer and Dave Stern.
The following is a Tony Lasano podcast, an Opie show on the Radio Misfits Podcast Network. This is the Minutia Men Celebrity Interview with Rick and Dave.
Okay, joining us on the phone from lovely California is a man who's well known in Chicago. He's a great comedian, Tom Dreesen. Thanks very much for being on the show with us.
I'm happy to do that, and I'm from Sherman Oaks. I'm calling you from Sherman Oaks, California. It's a beautiful day out here. The view and the scenery here is fantastic. Nothing like downtown Harvey.
or the studio. I'm looking at Rick's garage right here.
Yeah, right. We're at Mount Prospect, the lovely Mount Prospect, Illinois, right now.
Well, welcome to the show, Tom. Thanks very much for taking the time.
Tom, you and I have met quite a few times. You probably don't remember me, but I used to produce the John Records Landecker show on WJMK when he was there, and you were a frequent guest on the show. And you'd come on the show and you had this great story about how John Landecker became an example for you when you would talk to young comedians about how not to do comedy. Is that a true story?
Well, what happened was years ago, we're going back in 1971, I think 72, there were no comedy clubs in America. I mean, like we have today, over 500-something comedy clubs. So those of us in Chicago who were starting out, we did charities. We would appear on stage anywhere, anytime you could. There were comedians that would join AA, even though they didn't have a
Hey, it's an audience. It's a good room, right?
But you had to find some place to get up on stage. So I used to say we'd play a phone booth if you promised to call, because we needed that stage time. So Tim and I had gone to New York and seen the improvisation, and it was just starting out then, and how comics could get up every night and try out the new material. So I came back to Chicago and talked to a man named Henry Norton. He owned a few clubs, but he owned a club called the Le Pub. And I said to him, his worst night was Monday night. He didn't have much business, so I convinced him to let us do a comedy night there on Monday night, and it became Chicago's first comedy club. And so the word got out, and I did John's show, of course, promoting it, and so everybody's coming there. And John said, "I've always wanted to try stand-up. I'm going to be there. I'm going to put together what I think is a 10-minute routine, 5 to 10 routine, and then I'm going to get up." So he got there, and of course there were comedians who were getting up who had some stage presence and some stage times, and they were new kids. And when John saw that, he ordered a pitcher of beer. And he drank that so fast that he thought he'd order another pitcher of beer. and then John got up after 2 pitchers of beer. And I've always said to everybody, do not drink 2 pitchers of beer before you do your first stand-up comedy.
Well, we've got John's phone number, so you can actually have them call him, and he'll be happy to relay that to him. You had mentioned
who came with him that night was Bob Surratt. Came with him.
Oh. Yeah, that's right.
Surratt always, whenever we get together, we talk about John's debut as a stand-up comedian, his first and his last appearance.
That's true. He's never done it since.
You had mentioned Tim Reid just a couple of seconds ago, and you guys were the first mixed-race comedy team. Did you? And this is probably a stupid question, but I assume you got heckled at some point by racists while you were doing your act, or were you? I don't know. How did that all shake out?
Well, let's go back to that era. In 1969, Tim Reid and I went on stage for the first time. This is our 50th year in show business for both.
Wow. Congratulations.
We went on stage for the first time. we were America's first black and white comedy team, and history shows we were the last. We did it for 6 years all around the country. In 1969, the Vietnam War was raging. I had just gotten out of the service. Students were protesting all over America. African Americans were rioting in every major city in America, getting disenfranchised from the system. And even one of the largest riots in the country was in Harvey, Illinois, where I grew up at. And so this is what we were experiencing. There was racial tension all over America. And Tim and I were going out there trying to make, and the backdrop was the Vietnam War and the riots, and Tim and I were just trying to make America laugh. We did high schools and colleges, and we went to 11 prisons in 1 year. And,
wow.
To just not lecturing or anything, just trying to make people laugh.
Right.
And we paid the price for that in many cases. On the fourth time around, we went on stage in Chicago Heights, Illinois. A guy put a lit cigarette out in Tim's face and then tried to beat the hell out of me.
God.
And I boxed when I was in the service, but he outweighed me by 100 pounds. But it was a real Donnybrook, And at University of Illinois one time, a guy took an ice ball, went outside in the snow and packed an ice ball and threw it and hit me in the face on the stage while we were doing our show. However, that being said, 95% of the people that saw us liked what we did, but there was always that one element.
Yeah.
If there was a black guy who, now we worked all black clubs too in the North and the South. There were no comedy clubs, so we worked what they call the Chitlin Circuit, black-owned, black-operated nightclubs. The 20 Grand in Detroit, the High Chaparral in Chicago, the Burning Sphere in Chicago, Guys and Gals Lounge in Chicago, Sugar Shack in Boston, Club Harlem in Atlantic City. These are the kind of clubs we worked. If there was a black guy who hated white people, hated them with a passion, he wasn't mad at me. He was mad at Tim for being with me.
Oh, wow.
And vice versa. If there was a white guy, a redneck who hated black people with a passion, he wasn't mad at Tim. He was mad at me for being with Tim.
Interesting.
I'd be the N-word lover. And they didn't mind calling me that every now and then. And down in Atlanta one time, I had a real skirmish with three guys in the men's room down there. But that's just, it was just what we had to put up with. We paid dues that no other comedy team ever had to pay. We wrote a book called Tim and Tom, an American comedy in black and white that came out about 5 years ago. And now, I mean, you can get it on Amazon. I'm not trying to sell the book. Now, because of that book, there's talk of us maybe doing a series. Not Tim and I, we'd produce it, but someone playing Tim and Tom from 1969 to 1975, and maybe do it as a series or as a feature film. We're meeting with people as we speak right now, as I'm talking to you.
That would be spectacular.
Yeah,
that would
great.
Be
That's a great story. I'd definitely go see that. A lot of people know you also from your many appearances on the David Letterman show when he had his show, various different shows. And you and David go way back. How did you meet him, and do you still talk to him today? What's that relationship like?
I talked to him yesterday for 2 hours.
Oh,
okay.
We talk on the phone. When he had his show, we would talk for like 5-10 minutes catching up. But not, and I did his show about 50 times.
Right.
And so we'd always go to dinner afterward when I'd go to New York. But how I met him, I was, knew out on the West Coast, the comedy team had just split up, and in 1975. I came off stage one night, and there was this redheaded guy with a beard, and he had a old red pickup truck that he drove from Indianapolis with. And he said, "I sure enjoyed your show, Mr. Dreesen." So you're set, So I'm very outgoing and extroverted. So I said, "Hey, no kidding. What's your name?" Dave Letterman. "Where you from, Dave?" "Indianapolis." And so I immediately start talking sports. Indianapolis. Let me ask you something. Who did you root for as a baseball team when you were going? I took it to him. Had I realized he was such a private person, when I first met him, I didn't know what a private guy he was, and I took it to him. And so next day I saw him, "Hey, what are you doing?" And before you know it, I invited him to go play racquetball with me, and then we started playing basketball together. And by the time I realized that he was really very private, it was too late. We were already friends.
That's great.
Had I known that he was that shy and private, I probably would have respected that and not. But I'm so extroverted, I just kept taking it to him, and we became the best of friends and are to this day. I'm so proud of him and all he's accomplished in his career.
Yeah, he's done pretty good.
I went with him the first night that he hosted the Tonight Show. I was in the wings and watched him do it the first time. And he's just a great friend, and there isn't anything that I wouldn't do for him. And I know that he has that same feeling for me.
Could you tell him that the beard's got to go, though? I mean,
I like the beard.
Do you?
Yeah, I do like the beard.
It makes him look like 20 years older. I think that's just I love David Letterman. Don't get me wrong.
You know what?
Well, I asked him the other day. You're not doing stand-up anymore, so why don't you become Santa Claus at Macy's?
Now that would be a great Netflix documentary there, I think. Frank Sinatra.
He told me yesterday, I got to tell you something so funny.
Sure. All right.
He told me something yesterday. He said, you know, you always tell the story how we met outside the Comedy Store. He said, I think it'd be better if we just told everybody that you came off stage one night and accused me of stealing one of your jokes, and I denied it, but then you beat the hell out of me in the parking lot.
That's a better one.
I want to start telling people that. I said, no, why would you tell people that? He said, because it's just a better story. He said, I'm going to start telling people.
Speaking of stories, you got any Frank Sinatra stories? You opened for him for many years, and being a fly on the wall there must have been a pretty amazing time. Do you have any Frank Sinatra stuff?
Well, let me correct you. First of all, you said that I opened for Frank Sinatra. I like to think that he closed.
Good point.
Right, exactly.
Noted.
Now, I toured with Frank Sinatra 14 years in 45, 50 cities a year.
Wow.
And it was just the greatest experience of a comedian's lifetime.
Oh my God.
In that 14 years that I toured with Frank, I turned down more sitcoms and more opportunities for shows than most comedians get offered in a lifetime. And for a reason. At that same time that I was touring with Frank Sinatra, I was also on a tour, a golf tour called the Celebrity Players Tour. It was basketball, baseball, football, hockey, tennis, and show business people that were 10 handicap or below. So it was Johnny Bench, Mike Schmidt, Mario Lemieux, John Elway, Dan Marino, Michael Jordan. We had 42 Hall of Famers. And show business, it was Matt Lauer, Brian Gumble, me, Smokey Robinson, Eddie Marinaro, people like that, and Jack Wagner. And we were paid for this. Rick Rhoden won over $2 million on that tour.
Wow.
We did 10 to 12 cities a year.
Wow.
I was one of the founders of that tour along with some other guys. But here I was. As a little boy growing up in Harvey, I had 8 brothers and sisters. We lived in a shack, raggedy poor, holes in my shoes, all my childhood. I shined shoes in taverns. I set pins in bowling alleys. I caddied in the summertime. I sold newspapers on the corner, all to help feed my brothers and sisters. None of this I regret, by the way. But when I was on my hands and knees, shining shoes in bars, Frank Sinatra was on the jukebox. Come fly with me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And here I was, years later, flying with him all over the world on his private jet. It was surreal sometimes when he'd say to me, hey, Tommy, we're going to Chicago, to the Chicago Theater. We're going to knock him dead. And he'd give me a little sock on the jaw. And he didn't know, but inside I was like, ready to burst into tears.
A little boy jumping up and down,
Yeah, and then the other thing was I always loved sports. I played sports, a lot as a kid growing up. But I was a little guy, so playing football, I was running back, but getting hurt most of the time. And I played basketball, and in the service I played basketball, and I played in a fast pitch softball league till I was 58 years old out here in L.A.
Wow.
I played left field, and I played basketball till I was 48 in the league. I was always very active sports-wise, but at that local level. If you would have told me when I was growing up that one day you're going to fly all over the world with Frank Sinatra in his private jet and grace the same stage with him, and you're also going to be competing with the greatest athletes of your lifetime. You're going to be getting into an arena, and you're going to compete with the greatest athletes. I'd have said that's absolutely impossible.
Yeah.
But here I was doing that. So Christopher Morley, the author, once said, success is living the life you want. So whenever they came to me with a sitcom offer or something like that, and I thought, well, I'd have to give up the Celebrity Players Tour, competing with all these wonderful athletes that I admired all my life, and I'd have to give up, flying with Frank and appearing on stage with Frank Sinatra in 45, 50 cities a year. It was a no-brainer. I said, sorry, I don't want to do it.
And now you're doing our podcast, which is probably the pinnacle of your career, I would imagine.
Exactly. And Tom, you and I...
I said earlier, this is the pinnacle. It's all downhill after.
Right. You'll never top this.
You're not getting paid, right?
Yeah. So we talked about sports briefly, and you and I share a common love, and that is the Cubs. I know you're at Wrigley every year singing "Take Me Out to the Ball Game." You were kind enough, Dave and I are publishers, you were kind enough to contribute to our book called Cub Sessions, which you did with Becky Sarwati Maxwell and Randy Richardson. And I have a book called Every Cub Ever, which is out now.
We'd love to send it to you. So after we get off the air, I'll get your mailing address, and we'll. And Rick actually wrote a book that literally has a biography of every Cub ever. Yeah, 2,100.
Really?
Yes,
right.
I know you'll love it. We'll send it to you.
Rick spent a lot of time in his basement doing this. Rick has never kissed a girl, Tom.
but I wrote a great book. But anyway, about the Cubs, you talk about coming from Harvey, and I know you've probably told this story, but I can't remember ever hearing it. How does someone from the south side of Chicago, Harvey, become a Cubs fan, and is that how you also became a boxer? You're very. You don't realize how correct you are. I was like 5, 6 years old listening to Cub games on the radio because my dad listened to Cub games on the radio. So I'm 5 or 6 years old and I'm becoming a Cub fan. I'm a little boy. I'm hearing names like Andy Pafko and Peanuts Lowrey and Phil Cavaretta and Bill Nicholson. These are all in the book.
My dad was a Cub. Now I'm 5 or 6 years old hearing that. I became a Cub fan, not realizing that I was in enemy territory.
Okay, all right. You found out pretty quickly, though, didn't you?
White Sox fans. All White Sox fans around me. By the time I was 8 years old, I could take a punch.
So is it a big thrill to go up there? When they ask you to come up there and sing, is that still a big thrill for you every time, or is it old hat now?
I'm doing it now September 19th this year against St. Louis, when they're playing St. Louis. And Joe Mantegna and I are tied for the most times of singing on the 7th inning stretch. I think we've done it 17 or 18, ever since Harry died.
Right.
Joe and I are tied for that.
Who's the better singer between you and Joe? Who's the better singer?
I love going back. It's really exciting. First of all, I'm a comedian. I'm not a singer. I sang in the choir when I was a little boy and when I was an altar boy. But for you to go out there and 40,000 people and you get up in that booth and it's a bit intimidating, but it's really fun to do. And Cub fan. I've always said this about, first of all, I rooted for the Sox, too, even though no Sox fan would ever believe that. Jerry Reinsdorf and I are real good friends, and I go to dinner with him when I come home, and we tell each other jokes, and I love the guy, And so, but White Sox-Cub fan rivalry is hard to describe to people who don't understand it. When I was growing up, if there was a bar on the south side of Chicago that was a Sox bar, you didn't walk in there with a Cub hat on.
Right. That is so true.
My people can get kind of ornery.
Yeah, Dave is a White Sox fan.
And I've often said that I actually would prefer the Cubs losing versus the White Sox winning, to be honest with you. I am one of those petty, small, little White Sox fans. When the White Sox were going to play it looked like they were going to, I think they played St. Louis in the World Series a few years back, or it looked like they were going to be, but Mike Downey called me, the great sports writer. He called me and he said, will Cub fans, if White Sox play St. Louis in the World Series, and St. Louis is supposed to be the Cubs' number one rivalry, he said if the White Sox played St. Louis, who would Cub fans root for? I said, well, slam dunk, they'd root for St. Louis.
I think you're right.
No, they would. I said, yes, they would.
Tom, if the Cubs played Al Qaeda, I'd be rooting for Al Qaeda, my
friend. All right. So one of the reasons we had you on is because you're going to be in town soon. Please let us know
all the stuff,
where and how people can see you live.
I'm appearing with my one-man show, An Evening of Laughter and Stories of Sinatra. It's a 90-minute show that I put together after Frank passed away. And because everywhere I went, people would say, tell me about Frank Sinatra. Tell me a Frank Sinatra story.
Yeah.
So I put together this 90-minute show, which is stand-up comedy. I mean, the theater goes dark. A screen comes out, and Dennis Farina, God rest his soul, narrates about 3 minutes of my life, and then with film. And then I come walking out, and I do stand-up comedy. And then after about 25 minutes of doing stand-up, I segue over to a bar that's on the stage where there's a bottle of Jack Daniels on the bar, which was Frank's drink of choice.
Yeah, and he used to do that too. I saw him live once, and he would have a little bar up there sometimes and act out to scene at the bar, right?
Right. And so what I did do there is I tell a funny story, and the audience laughs, and while they're laughing, the lights go out on stage, and on the screen, Frank starts singing. You see it, Frank in a video singing, "It's 2:45, there's no one in the place except you and me, you know, one for my baby."
Right.
It's a saloon song. When he gets to the chorus, "Make it one for my baby and one more for the road," he goes off screen, and the spotlight hits me, and I'm at a bar. And I've come home, and the audience is in a bar with me.
Oh, wow.
I'm getting chills.
I tell them the first time I heard that voice, I was 8 years old, shining shoes in a bar in Harvey, Illinois, and he was on the jukebox. And then I take the audience from that little boy from Harvey, Illinois, hearing Sinatra on the jukebox, and Harvey, to one day carrying his coffin out of a church in Beverly Hills, California.
Oh, my gosh.
So I take him on that journey, and while I'm telling stories, pictures are authenticating the stories I'm telling on the screen. You know,
right.
It's an audio-visual thing, word pictures. And I have them laughing. But I take them to the funeral, and I actually have them in tears, and then I turn right around and have them laughing again.
Wow.
And I close with a funny monologue, and then I toast them with the Jack Daniels and say, "I wish for all of you what Frank Sinatra wished for you. The very last song that he ever sang is that the best is yet to come."
Wow.
Good night, everybody. And when I say good night, then Frank's singing, "The best is yet to come." You know,
oh, my gosh.
Leaving the theater.
I got goosebumps.
Thank you very much, Tom, for being on the show. We greatly appreciate it. And the best of luck to you. And
the best is yet to come.
And the best is yet to come. Exactly right. And go Cubs.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I'm sure your partner agrees with that.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah, you see,
we will send you a copy of the book, though.
Yeah, I'll right after we get off the air.
No, please. Please do that. Please do that.
Yeah, you know what? Text me. Well, I'll text you, and then just text me a mailing address, and I'll be happy to send it out to you.
Thanks, Tom.
Okay, thank you, guys. Take care.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
What a great guy.
Thank you so much, Tom Dreesen. That was an excellent interview. Special thanks to executive producer Tony Lasano with opishows.com. Opie is hippo backwards. OPPIH shows.com. I'm distributed by Ed Silla, the Radio Misfits Podcast Network. Great Talk It Radio isn't dead. It's just moved to a better place. RadioMisfits.com. And Dave will be back again next week with another episode of
Minutia Man.
The preceding was a presentation of Opie Productions. Find our other great shows wherever you find podcasts, including opishows.com. Thank you.
This has been a presentation of Opie Productions.
Tony, can you shut up?